You know how it is, you get a family heirloom, a strange little trinket from a dead relative's attic. But what if it started moving on its own? This is the story of 4 people who inherited objects that came with a terrible, hidden history.
Yeah, for most of us, an inheritance is a bittersweet kind of gift. It might be a piece of jewelry, a watch, a faded photograph, tangible memories of people we loved. They're these little threads that tie us to a past we think is settled, a past we think we understand.
So we take these items, we put them on our shelves, tuck them away in drawers, and we believe that's it. The story ends there.
But for the people in this story, the inheritance wasn't an ending. Oh no, it was a beginning. It was like a key turning in a lock they never even knew was there. So let's get into it, the call from beyond. This is that moment where everything kicks off. For these folks, it wasn't some grand announcement. It came in a pretty ordinary way, actually. A lawyer's letter or just a dusty box showing up on a doorstep.
So, what did they get? Well, let's break it down. First, there was a simple silver locket. Second, a carved wooden music box. A third person got a set of 4 ornate dinner plates, the fancy family china. And the fourth? A heavy leather-bound journal with a big brass clasp. 4 totally unique objects, all going to different branches of this mysterious family tree. So what was the common thread? Well, they were all left by one man, a distant, eccentric relative named Alistair Vance, a guy known for his huge collections and for living a very solitary life.
At first, of course, there was hesitation. I mean, wouldn't you hesitate? It's that natural refusal of the strange. It's just like the quote says, "The rational mind is a fortress, and it defends itself fiercely against the inexplicable." And that's exactly what each new owner did. They tried to find a perfectly logical reason for the unsettling feelings these new heirlooms were stirring up.
But that threshold, it always gets crossed, doesn't it? It's that moment when your curiosity finally outweighs your fear. Or maybe more to the point, when the strange stuff happening just becomes impossible to ignore anymore. Let's look at how they tried to rationalize it all. The person who got the journal, they had this constant low-grade feeling of being watched whenever it was in the room. So what do? You dismiss it as grief, an overactive imagination. The owner of the locket felt this really strange chill when wearing it, like a cold metal burn against their chest. They told themselves, oh, it's just a draft. The music box would sometimes be found open in the morning, even though it was latched tight the night before. A trick of the memory, right? Gotta be. And the plates. The plates just felt wrong. There was this subtle, greasy film on them that you just couldn't wash off no matter what.
But for each of them, that period of rationalization came to a hard stop. The slide really says it all. The ordinary world was gone. Their journey into the truly strange had begun.
For the keeper of the journal, the point of no return was the night that brass clasp just snapped open all by itself and the pages started to turn, slowly, as if by an unseen hand. For the one with the locket, it was waking up one morning to find it clutched in their own hand, the chain wrapped so tightly around their wrist it left angry red marks and they had no memory of doing it. The music box, it started to play its haunting, unfamiliar lullaby right in the dead of night. And the plates, one of them just shattered. Not dropped, no. It was sitting perfectly still on a shelf and it just exploded into fragments with a sound like a gunshot.
And this led to the next phase, trials and terrible truths. At first, the trials were all individual, a series of escalating, private horrors that each person thought they were facing alone.
The journal's text actually began to change. Faded ink would darken, forming whole new sentences, directions to places, frantic warnings written in a script they didn't recognize. The portrait inside the locket, this picture of a severe, unsmiling woman, it actually seemed to age. Her features grew gaunt. Her eyes deepened into hollows. The music box's tune got louder, more insistent, and people started hearing faint whispers woven into the melody, voices calling out names. And the remaining plates, they started developing these hairline cracks that formed strange, angular symbols, symbols that were now also appearing in the journal. Absolutely desperate, they finally found an ally, a historian cousin who started digging into Alistair Vance's past, and what he found was chilling. See, Alistair wasn't a collector, he was an acquirer. He specifically sought out objects tied to tragedy and pure malevolence. He wasn't collecting art, he was collecting anchors. Anchors for something dark. So this cousin connected the 4 of them online. Strangers, now bound together by this shared terror. And they started comparing notes, the locations in the journal, They were the exact addresses where each object had originally been found, decades earlier. A suicide in a lonely apartment, a disappearance from an old farmhouse, a murder in a city townhouse, a fatal fire. Each object was a souvenir from a site of profound human suffering.
And that led them to the ordeal, to the darkest night. The journal gave one final commanding instruction: bring them together where it began. And the address? Alistair Vance's own derelict mansion, the very place where he had died. Driven by this wild mix of dread and a desperate hope that maybe uniting the items could break whatever spell they held, they all agreed to meet.
So picture it. They're in the grand, rotting foyer of this house. They place the locket, the music box, the 3 plates, and the open journal on a dusty table. For a second, there was just silence. Then, the music box cranked itself, playing its tune at a deafening volume. The locket started to vibrate and then snapped shut. The plates began to hum, their cracks glowing with this faint, sickly light, and the journal's pages just erupted, fluttering in a wind that came from nowhere. The air in that room grew thick and cold.
Shadows in the room literally detached from the walls, pooling and swirling around that table. They weren't alone, not anymore. They were in the presence of all that accumulated anguish, the trapped echoes of pain that Alistair had curated. The house itself, it seemed to wake up.
And it was angry.
And that's when they got their reward. Not treasure, but a terrible revelation. In the eye of that psychic storm, they finally understood Alistair Vance hadn't been haunted by these objects. He had been feeding them. And by leaving them to his unsuspecting relatives, he was just passing on the responsibility of that feeding. The objects were like leeches, and the emotional energy of fear, of dread, of witnessing the unnatural, that was their food. And that clarity was more horrifying than any ghost.
So now, the survivors return. The way back was just chaos, a frantic escape from that mansion. They left the objects right there, on that table, in the heart of the darkness that gave them their power. They fled, sealed the heavy doors behind them, and vowed never to return. And you know what? The immediate hauntings, they just ceased. The cold spots vanished, and the whispers fell silent.
On the surface, everything went back to normal. But, as the slide says, they returned to a world that looked like the one they'd left, but would never feel the same again.
And this is the transformation. They're marked. Not by anything you can see, but by the knowledge, the understanding that the world is not always a rational, safe place. That some legacies are not of love, but of predation. Now they check shadows not out of habit, but with the practiced eye of a survivor. They avoid antique stores, estate sales, the dusty corners of old houses. The memory of that collective presence in the Vance mansion is a scar on their perception of reality.
They returned with a lesson, but it's a bitter one. A warning that some objects carry weight. Not the weight of memory, but the weight of a presence, a hunger. Alistair Vance did not leave them heirlooms. He left them cages. And for a short, terrifying time, they were the keepers.
So let me leave you with this thought. The next time you find some strange, beautiful thing from a relative's past, just ask yourself a question. Are you inheriting a memory, or are you inheriting a key? And what exactly are you unlocking?